everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Paige Pellaton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a thesis student here at NU. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the incorporation, assimilation, and community of Asian American political behavior. So to begin with, I just want to talk about why we care about Asian American political behavior exactly. Well, they make up a little less than 20 million persons in the United States population, and they make up a little less than 6% of the total United States population. As you can see, there are 6 main ethnic groups within this variation. So that's Chinese, Filipino, Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. So there's a lot of national origin diversity to this group. Other things that are, some things that's not really commonly known is that Asian immigration is actually surpassing Hispanic immigration in the last, over the last 10 years, which is really interesting and not commonly known. Another not commonly known fact is that 1 out of 7 Asians in America is estimated to be an undocumented immigrant. 74% of this group is actually born outside of the United States. And in terms of their social networks, if they're all, or if a lot of them are born outside of the United States, what do their social networks really look like? Well, we know that the stereotype is kind of that they develop insular communities as they come to the United States, and there might be some truth to that stereotype. So 41% say all or most of their friends in the United States are from their same country of origin, and 29% of newlyweds married someone who was not Asian, and 6% of those Asian Americans married an Asian person who was not from their country of origin. So you can see that they're kind of more insular communities, very highly reliant on each other. So what does this mean for their political participation? Well, Asian Americans are known to have increasing voting turnout rates over the last 3 or 4 cycles. 2016 was also no different. I actually recently heard that it's estimated that, what was it? I think it was estimated that over 100,000 new Asian Americans registered in the 2016 election, which I found really surprising and very uplifting. So my theoretical background today. Well, in terms of Asian American political participation, I'm really curious about their political incorporation along legal lines, which involves the acquirement of citizenship, institutional lines, which involves kind of the processes of democratic civil society, like partisan affiliation, and cultural incorporation. And cultural incorporation involves things like Americanization. So that's really getting to know the country and getting to feel that you belong in the country, or you can be identified as someone who belongs in the country. So when it comes to Asian Americans, because 74% of them are born outside of the United States, there are a couple of theories about how they kind of become culturally incorporated into the United States. So one of these theories is straight line assimilation, and that's something that you're going to recognize from like 18th century, 19th century European or Eastern European immigration in the United States. So the hypothesis goes that immigrants come into the United States, they settle into urban enclaves or urban densely populated neighborhoods with lots of people from their co-ethnic group. And then over generations, they acquire capital and they acquire skills, and they're able to move out of those densely populated urban areas into typically predominantly white suburbs. However, noticing the fact that Asian American immigrants are not all that much like European immigrants, namely they are wealthier individuals that are coming to the United States. They also tend to be more highly educated than the European immigrants of the past. Cortese and Zhao and Sampson actually develop a different theory called segmented assimilation that builds on the idea of European assimilation like this. So basically, segmented assimilation proposes that, sure, some people might follow that European model, but there also might be some people that, that immigrate into the United States, move into these densely populated areas of similar co-ethnics, and then end up staying there for either lack of development of resources, or they develop resources, but they choose to stay within those co-ethnic communities. Another way that Asians are actually culturally assimilated into the United States might be that they move into these urban, densely populated areas with people from their same national origin background. And then as they develop capital, they do end up moving out of those urban enclaves, but instead of moving into predominantly white suburbs, we find that they're moving into largely co-ethnic communities. So these are also called ethnoburbs. So you see up here, Chinatown is kind of what you would consider like that classic model of an urban ethnic enclave versus Chinoburbia, which is a short name for ethnoburbia because it's ethnic enclave and suburban area combined. And so really, the question becomes, why is it that Asian Americans choose to stay in Chinatowns or Chino-burbia, and how do we get them more politically incorporated? Well, some of these communities might be developed communities of constraint, meaning they have certain barriers, like there's lack of language assistance, there's high transience of that community, lack of familiarity with the country. And then some types of researching communities are economically diverse communities, they're financially sustainable, they're places where people are investing in the ethnic infrastructure. So to develop my theory, I have a proposed model that group sentiment among Asian Americans, meaning a sense of commonality, a sense of shared fate or shared race, is going to lead to a decrease in political behavior in the United States. I hypothesize that cultural integration, meaning the more one is quote-unquote Americanized, is going to lead to increases in political behavior. And I hypothesize that social activity, meaning the more that one is engaged in activity outside of the home, is going to lead to more political behavior. So my dependent variables, to conduct this study, I used the National Asian American Survey from 2008. It is one of the only specifically Asian American targeted surveys in the United States, and it's also the largest and most representative of the entire population. So my dependent variables for political behavior are voting behavior, which is scaled from 0 to 2, and that counts whether or not the respondent voted in 2004 and whether or not they anticipate voting in 2008. My second dependent variable is other political activity, scaled from 0 to 6, and that counts whether or not the respondent has discussed politics with family and friends or on the internet, was involved with a campaign or party, donated to a campaign or party, contacted a government official, or attended a protest within the last 12 months. And so the last one here is an additive measure of just the first two, so that's scaled from 0 to 8, and it's just a combination. So my independent variables are actually, again, group sentiment, social activity, and cultural integration. I measure group sentiment by checking whether or not the respondent feels that Asians have a shared fate, shared race, shared culture, shared economic interests, and shared political interests. When it comes to cultural integration, I'm really wondering whether or not the respondent can speak English fluently, if they're US or foreign born, if their mother or father were born in the United States or abroad, whether or not they've been educated through a predominantly American school system, and also what their partner's race is. And then lastly, for social activity, scaled from 0 to 3, I ask about external employment, whether or not the respondent is engaged in organization membership, whether or not they attend religious services, if they've ever participated in community problem solving to solve like a collective action problem, and then also non-religious activity at a place of worship. And then also other things that I controlled for in my multiple regression was Asian American identity, destination type, which is a type of like immigration hub. So I was testing what type of community the Asian Americans are settling into when they enter the United States. So the findings here, please note that my baseline respondent is a college-educated, quote, hyphen American woman. So for example, hyphen American might be how someone who identifies as, say, like Chinese American. So it's basically like their ethnic or national origin group plus American at the end. And so my base respondent is hyphen American woman making between $50,000 and $75,000 a year who identifies as a moderate, lives in the West in a traditionally continuous destination. So the best example for that is like San Francisco. And basically what I found was kind of a large confirmation of my results, but not to the same extent that I was anticipating. So with group sentiment here, you see non-voting political behaviors. You do see that with increases in group sentiment result in decreases in non-voting political behavior. And you see cultural integration and social activity do, as those increase, they do lead to increases in non-voting political behavior. In terms of voting activity, you'll see that only cultural integration was statistically significant variable. And then lastly, combined political participation largely followed the same trends. So as group sentiment increased, political behavior decreased, as cultural integration increased, political behavior increased, and lastly, as social activity increased, political behavior did as well. So the two control variables that I really kind of want to draw your attention to are Asian American identity and destination. So unfortunately, I wasn't really able to capture a lot of trends when it comes to really national origin status or citizenship status. And so one way that I tried to kind of test for this idea of cultural integration or Americanization was by testing Asian American identity. So in this case, I did find that people who identify specifically as Asian American, if they do identify as Asian American, then that increases their non-voting political behavior. I found that people who identify solely by their ethno-national group, that actually does result in decreases in political behavior. And I did find that people who identify solely as Asian, that even more decreases their non-voting political behavior. However, you'll see that people who identify as American are not statistically all that different from people who identify as hyphen American. Oh, and lastly, this destination pre-emerging. You'll see that this is a fairly large number in comparison to the rest of the coefficients that I ended up finding. So this pre-emerging destination is places like, one really weird example is Columbus, Ohio is a particularly popular one. And so these are basically destinations that are pre-emerging, meaning that they have seen an influx of immigration since 1965. So again, feelings of high commonality and with other Asian Americans tends to lead to decreased political participation. Integration into broader society, as it increases, also political participation does too. And then I also found that higher levels of social activity are correlated with greater political participation. The real question that I wasn't able to get at with this preliminary research is really how these layers are able to interact. And unfortunately, that's not something that I was able to necessarily attack in this moment, but definitely as America is continuing to grow into the majority-minority country by what some experts predict to be as early as 2044, it's definitely something that we want to look at, because Asian Americans, they seem to be a particularly affluent group on the whole, though that the idea of Asian Americans as solely an affluent and highly educated group paints over a lot of within-group variation that unfortunately I wasn't able to cover by this study. And with that, I believe I'm done. Thank you.